Okay, shalom, welcome. I am standing in front of a U.S. patent M48A5 tank. This was made during World War II and constructed and reaffirmed by Israel into what's called the Magach 5 tank that was used in the 1948 Independence War. You could see just how big this thing is with guns up there and massive, massive turret that can fire huge amounts of artillery. In 1948, Israel was up against 5 different armies. It was up against Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, and Iraq had even sent soldiers across Jordan to fight. Plus, there were Arabs inside of Israel who had lived here who also fought against Israel. It was a tough war. Israel only had 600,000 people, very few of them able to fight. It would actually lose 1% of its population in the war. A lot of these soldiers had just come off the boat and were Holocaust survivors. This was not going to be an easy war, and a lot of people, including President Truman of the United States and the United States military, actually thought Israel was going to lose this war and had asked Israel to postpone making the state of Israel, making the foundation of the state of Israel in 1948 for 2 more years in the hopes that America could broker peace with Israel. In the 1948 war, Israel used machinery like this. They didn't have so much of it. Most of the countries would not, including America, would not give Israel tanks, and Israel had to improvise. They had to make changes in these tanks so that it could be used in Israel, while America was mostly using these tanks in Europe in World War II. These tanks were not designed to be used in the battlefield here in the Middle East, here in Israel. So Israel had to make changes, and that's been a constant flow of Israeli soldiers in the IDF, in the Israel Defense Forces, has always been to take tanks like these, take hardware that they get from the United States, that they got from France, they get from Czechoslovakia, different countries, and make changes to it so that they become even better than they were. Now, there's something very important to realize that we're going to talk about over and over in these clips, which is the fact that the IDF is not an offensive army. It's not looking to capture other land. What it's trying to do is just simply defend itself. And in 1948, when Israel declared its independence, it had a very serious choice to make. Does it put its soldiers in harm's way, possibly losing the war and any state of Israel? We're looking at things post facto. We're looking at things from 75 years later and saying, well, of course Israel should go to war because we knew that Israel won the war. But in fact, back then, it wasn't clear that Israel was going to win. But our soldiers fought with bravery. Hashem helped them, and they won. We're going to pause for a minute, and I'm going to go around to the other side of this tank where you can see how it looks like not only inside the tank, but how soldiers sit and how close they are inside the tank. Okay, welcome back. We are looking at the inside of this Magach 5 tank. Used to be a U.S. patent M48A5. And what we're looking at here is this display that they show of how people sat in a tank. This is half the tank, cut in half, and you can see inside with these models here, these mannequins of soldiers, and you can see the first thing that you notice when you look at these soldiers is just how close they are to each other. There's like 1.5 inches between these 2 men, and you don't sit in this tank for a nice half-hour drive. You sit in this tank for 3 or 4 days. Nobody showers, nobody gets to leave the tank. You're going to the bathroom inside the tank. It's hot inside the tank. Back then, this Magach 5, there wasn't air conditioning in people's houses, let alone in a tank like this. It's hot, it's sticky, it's stressful. You have people shooting at you, and you have to shoot at other people. It's scary. This is not easy. Let me show you. This is the driver of the tank, and he's sitting so cramped. He can't move his seat back. He's stuck here. If the tank, God forbid, gets hit, so then what happens is he could just simply hit his head on some of the equipment, and that could be the end of him. It doesn't have to be what you see in the movies where the tank gets hit by this huge fiery ball. These tank drivers have to be very careful to protect themselves within the tank. Behind him, you have the loader. You could see that he's standing up. He has a small little bench that he could sit on, but he's standing up, his head outside the tank. So obviously that could be very dangerous in certain situations. So he's got to duck down. When he ducks down, he's sitting down with very little room to move. He has to take shells, which are missiles, and he has to put them into the tank, the turret where it's going to go. And he's got to do this quick enough to make sure that, number one, the shells get in there when the firer who's going to sit on the other side of the tank, that he could fire the shells and the rockets as fast as possible. But number two, not to do it too quickly so that they don't get stuck. Okay, let's come over here at the other side of the tank. And here you have other people who are going to be firing those shells. You can see the shells on the bottom. You can see just how tight it is again for the 4 people in here that are stuck inside this tank, and they've got to be able to shoot and fire. Look at Dan. If you can come over here closely, you can see how big these shells are. Okay, you can see them inside here. And these things can destroy other tanks. They can hit other groups of soldiers. And these are very, very dangerous munitions. Something to keep in mind. If a tank gets hit and a fire breaks out inside the tank, so then these shells could explode even inside the tank. Being a tank driver, you might think, or being inside a tank could be very secure and very easy job. Hey, you're inside this huge metal shell. What could possibly happen to you? It's actually a very, very dangerous job and one of the most serious jobs of the Army. Okay, let's stop here before we go on to our next exciting tank.